I don't think people really understand how big this really is. The Soros prosecutors, 20% of the U.S. population, half of the country's most populous cities, more than 40% of all murderers fall under these guys. And we're being told that you're an anti-Semite if you point this out. I don't care if he's the Pope. I really don't care what his religion is, what his race or creed. I don't care. When I decide whether or not I'm going to like someone, I do the actual homework, and I dislike them for reasons. Now, I know that's not popular, especially with the left, but I dislike them for instance, what they do, not who they are. But hopefully people are waking up to George Soros.
That's exactly what you would say. I mean, I'm not at all surprised that Mr. King of the Anti-Semites over here is going to bring up George Soros' name again.
Again, I mean, I just hate to point out, Defender of Israel Award, Benjamin Netanyahu was the one who, gave it to me.
Whatever. What I will say, it's funny because this one has been particularly disturbing. To go back here, Glenn, the Soros thing, they keep trying to go down the same road, and they did this same thing to you, going back to your days at Fox, your days at CNN Headline News, and before when you'd bring up George Soros, and you were one of the first people who were really obviously focusing on this. This is something that. It was a terrible thing that you did back in the day. Well,
it was before I understood that it was a terrible thing. I mean, I took on George Soros not knowing that you just didn't take on George Soros. I baptism by fire on that one.
Yeah, and so you kind of jumped in face first into that wall, and had to deal with the repercussions of that. But one of the things that was interesting about that period was Soros spent a lot of money on big ticket items, presidential races, senatorial races. He dumped money into these races for a long time.
And then he went to SOS. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He went to Secretary of States. He went to
that's exactly where I was going because, here's a international businessman who decided he wanted to spend his money more efficiently. This is what giant businessmen do. It's a smart idea from him. And what he did was look for races that he could spend instead of $100 million or $1 billion on a presidential race, where he could spend $1 million and make a massive difference to massive population centers in cities all across the country. The Secretary of State project came out of the idea that this old-timey idea where Democrats were the ones constantly saying that elections were stolen. And so he said, well, the problem was we have these secretaries of state, and they're the ones in charge of these elections. And in these close elections, we need these rulings to come out on our side instead of the other side. So he dumped money into Secretary of State races. Same thing here with criminal justice. He wanted to change the way we deal with criminal justice in this country. And instead of trying to get a president elected, he did what we kind of always talk about as conservatives. Target your local areas. Think about your local areas. And he went and dumped money into local areas, local small races, $1 million races all across the country. Mm-hmm. And for this, we should remember, he was praised by the media as being an innovative thinker. We're trying to get all these progressive things done. No one can seem to do it. George Soros has come up with a plan where he can spend money super efficiently and get these people elected. Politico wrote a glowing story about him back in 2016 called George Soros' Quiet Overhaul of the U.S. Justice System, where they talked about how he would support these candidates, just like his defense with Alvin Bragg, that he never met. He never talked to them individually. He saw what their plan was and supported them so they would win these races and give you the AOC version of policing and prosecution.
So they're trying to distance him now because you're seeing the damage that he has done. The out of control crime is caused by two things. One, George Floyd riots. Nobody went to jail. The vice president was actually soliciting funds to bail those people out. So you taught the whole society that you can do things as long as you're on the left, you can do things and get away with it. As if that wasn't enough. All 40% of all murderers fall under these guys. Okay, 40%. You've got 20% of the entire population and 40% of all big cities falling under their jurisdiction. So if the George Floyd riots didn't teach it, these DAs certainly did. You'll get away. I'm not going to hold you for bail or anything. That's why you don't have, in some cities, a CVS or a Walgreens. It's why when you're in New York, everything now in the Walgreens or the CVS is under lock and key. Everything. I mean, you walk down the aisles and the aisles are locked now behind glass. And you have to wait for an employee to come and open it up just to get some, hay fever medicine. It's insanity. Why?
It is insanity.
George Soros.
Yeah, he's done this to our communities. And again, not by himself. I don't think there was some big conspiracy. I think he saw people who agreed with him, like Alvin Bragg, and supported them. As the New York Times pointed out itself, the Color of Change organization who was supporting these types of DAs announced they were going to give $1 million to Alvin Bragg. 6 days later, George Soros donated $1 million exactly to Color of Change. As the New York Times pointed out, and this is not my wording, this is the New York Times' wording, they said when they were going through all of this that 6 days later, he donated May 14th, $1 million to the group, which intended to help Mr. Bragg with the money. That's the New York Times reporting on this. And now George Soros is saying it's a conspiracy theory. He wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which he says, I've supported the election and more recently the re-election of prosecutors who support reform. I have done it transparently and have no intention of stopping. Yeah, we can't talk about this person and his influence?
Right. It's not that he did anything illegal. He didn't. He gave money legally through the system. I believe it was, laundered in a way, but legally laundered. It was just setting him one person apart. It's, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. He's 1 degree away from these DAs. But that's legal, too. He didn't do anything illegal. But he is the guy who financed. Look, if it would have worked and our cities would have been safe, I wouldn't have a problem coming on and saying, I don't know how this happened, but George Soros has just made our city safer. And everyone in the country, if this was good, they all would have said that. Every media person would have said George Soros and his brilliant idea.
Yeah.
The problem is that the goal of George Soros is not to make things better. It is to collapse the United States. This is what he does. It is to make chaos so prevalent on our streets that you cry out for a dictator. You cry out for someone who says, you're just letting these people go. We've got to have a supreme leader that can make all this go away. That is the plan. We've been telling you that since 2008. The one thing, I don't ever want to... I don't want to be someone who brings more chaos to the world. I struggle with my job because my faith teaches me to be a peacemaker. So when I say these things, I think of the apostle, wasn't it Stephen, that was stoned to death? But the reason why he was stoned to death is he was like, look, here's your history. Here's what you've done, and you're doing it again. And they stoned him to death. That doesn't mean that he was trying to light chaos. He was telling the truth. So I'm just telling you the truth about George Soros and people like him. They are trying to fundamentally transform. And to do that, you've got to collapse this system. You have to have it collapse on its own weight into a new system that benefits those people. There's nothing. Well, I was going to say there's nothing wrong with it. There's all kinds of things wrong with it. It's evil. However, when you look at what George Soros is doing, it's not illegal. I think it's just evil. But the thing you have to remember, and I don't know when people are going to catch on to this, bad trees cannot bear good fruit. By their work ye shall know them. So look at the works, look at the fruit of the tree of what George Soros is doing with our DAs. Look at the fruit of the tree of this administration. It's bad fruit. Let's judge it on its works and its end product. You don't need to make this personal or anything else. Just look at the fruit. It's bad fruit.